probiotics are a little bit more specific, a little bit harder to determine like what makes sense for a specific person. But most people are going to benefit from a prebiotic just because it's going to do so much to balance out your microbiome. Because when you feed good bacteria, really what you're doing is pushing out bad bacteria.
Welcome to the Healthy Skin Show with Jennifer Fugo, where we're flipping everything you've been told about your chronic skin issues upside down and connecting you with alternative solutions your dermatologist never told you about.
Welcome back to episode number 2 of the Healthy Skin Show. In today's podcast, we are going to be diving deep to look at the connections between what the heck is going on in your gut, which you can't see, by the way, and sometimes you don't even have any symptoms. So we're looking at kind of like the microbiome, the bugs that live there, and the inflammatory processes that can start in the gut that then end up showing or presenting themselves on the skin. And so a lot of times you've probably had this experience where you're going and getting all these creams and treating it with moisturizers and emollients and all sorts of different types of products on your skin to deal with the rashes or the itchiness or dryness or what have you. But the problem is, oftentimes when it's a chronic problem, there's something underneath that is driving the rash. Because I know just how important this topic is and how little it's discussed within, I guess you could say, dermatology, I wanted to make sure that we devoted some time to really laying the groundwork, so to speak, so that when we talk about gut matters moving forward, you understand exactly what we are discussing and why it's of importance. So I invited a very dear and close friend of mine. Her name is Kelsey Kinney. She is a dietitian who approaches gut matters from a very integrative and functional methodology. And she knows a ton about the microbiome, about probiotics, all sorts of stuff. That is her wheelhouse. And I wanted to have her talk about this because of the experience that she has so that you can learn from the best. All right, let's dive into that conversation. Today, I've got a special guest for you. She's actually a friend that I hang out in real life with when I'm up in New York City, and perhaps I will see her soon. I don't know, but I love spending time with her. Her name is Kelsey Kinney. You may remember her as a guest from the Eczema and Psoriasis Awareness Week. And I had to invite her back because the information that she talked about, specifically in regards to inflammation, the immune system, we talked about psoriasis and micronutrients. It was just so great that I was like, we got to keep diving into this area. It's super important. And the inflammation piece is really critical for ongoing skin issues. So we're going to talk about that today. If you have not heard Kelsey talk before, let me give you a little background on her. She is a registered dietitian in private practice specializing in digestive and hormonal health. Now, here's the thing. If you're wondering if you can check her out and see her, you can. She works virtually just like I do. She completed her bachelor's degree in nutrition at NYU and holds a master's degree from the University of Western States in human nutrition and functional medicine. She works with her clients to address all aspects of chronic digestive and hormonal disease, including balancing the microbiome, optimizing motility, regulating the HPA axis, enhancing the gut-brain axis, and of course, encouraging a healthy diet and lifestyle. And guess what? Kelsey is my number one person. When I want to ask things about probiotics, she's a really smart cookie. Kelsey, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Jen. It's really exciting for me to be here.
Well, now we need to dive back into this inflammation piece. Inflammation in skin, right? That goes hand in hand with pretty much, I don't know, every skin condition that's chronic.
Pretty much.
So talk to us a little bit for somebody who is new to this. So they have seen a bunch of dermatologists. They've got a box or boxes full of creams and lotions and salves and medications and pills, and they've had shots and all sorts of stuff, and nothing really seems like it's working. And they're like, what else can I do? What would you tell them about inflammation when it comes to skin that they might not realize? You know, they're on the patient end of this. They don't know the questions to ask. What does inflammation have to do with ongoing skin problems?
Sure. Which is a great question, by the way. And there's something to clarify here too, which I think is overlooked, especially when we're talking about dermatologists. And that is this key component of what's going on internally. Because with dermatology, of course, we are very focused on the outside. We're focused on our skin, what's happening right on the skin, the inflammation in the skin right there causing those symptoms. But what else is happening underneath that is that there's this kind of widespread systemic inflammation that is happening just in your body overall. And what that has to do with is your digestion, your microbiome in your gut. And it's kind of hard to think about being connected, right? Like our gut, our digestion, like why does that have to do with our skin at all? But the truth is that when we have imbalances in our good and bad bacteria in the gut, because your microbiome is chock full of bacteria. It's got more than 100 trillion bacteria hanging out there in your intestines. And so you want to have, of course, mostly good bacteria and not a lot of bad bacteria. And so there's this really delicate balance between good and bad bacteria in the gut. And what we've seen in the research and what I see as a clinician and what I'm sure you see as well, more and more these days, is that there are so many people who have imbalances of good and bad bacteria in their microbiome. And we can look at that by testing, but also just symptoms. You know, if someone, for example, if someone has a skin condition, I pretty much right away know off the bat that their microbiome is messed up to some degree. It's imbalanced, and they probably have too much bad bacteria hanging out there. And the reason why that's a problem is because when you start to get this overgrowth of bad bacteria or there's not enough good bacteria, there's this phenomenon that happens called leaky gut or hyperintestinal permeability. And most people probably have heard of it as leaky gut versus intestinal permeability, but that's what you'll see in the scientific literature. And what that means essentially is that when you've got this imbalance of good and bad bacteria, it creates localized inflammation, first of all, within the gut itself. So right there in your intestines, you've got inflammation going on because of a particle called LPS that's produced by some of these bad bacteria. It's sort of really this aggravating, toxic piece of bacteria that causes inflammation right on the tissue of your gut. And when that tissue gets inflamed and irritated, it starts to pull apart. So it's actually like a single layer of cells. And those cells, they normally are pretty close together. And so only things that are supposed to flow through there into your bloodstream get through. That's things like, nutrients, of course, our vitamins, our minerals, water, things like that. And what it keeps out are things like bacteria, of course, those toxic particles that we just talked about, LPS, and all sorts of stuff that you can imagine come in through your mouth because it's a whole lot of stuff, let me tell you. And so your digestive system acts as sort of part of your immune system and a very important part of your immune system at that. So it's really helping to keep those bad things from getting into your bloodstream and thus getting into your body as a whole. So what happens is those cells move further away from each other and it creates a gap there. And so then these larger particles like whole bacteria or LPS or broken down pieces of food that are normally too big to fit through there get through. And then your immune system freaks out about that because it's like, what the heck are these things coming in? I'm not used to this. I don't know what this is. I'm going to attack this essentially. And so it causes this sort of immune storm to happen where you just create a lot of inflammation. And so research has shown that inflammation and actually those high levels of LPS, that toxic particle, are associated with a whole host of chronic diseases. And that includes things like skin diseases, because of course, when you think about skin diseases, inflammation is huge, not even just the localized part, but like we talked about, that internal inflammation. And so we know that those two things are connected. And so for me, and I'm sure for you as well, it's one of the first things I look at when I have someone with skin disorder, because if there's internal inflammation, which there almost always is, then it's going to aggravate those skin conditions and cause flare-ups or just ongoing issues with that skin condition that external salves and lotions and even things like steroid creams, they're going to only go so far. You have to kind of deal with that root cause of the inflammation that's, leading to these symptoms happening in the first place.
So, quick question. I am not a big fan of fixating on food as a trigger for skin issues because it's like trying to like throw a dart in the dark. And
Absolutely.
on top of it, I don't believe that a lot of times the food is really the root cause. Even if you are sensitive to something caused, right? Something had to cause the gut to become permeable in the first place. So what would be your quick answer? You can disagree with me, but if somebody's like, oh, let me try taking out eggs next. Let me try taking out sugar. Let me try taking out this. Let me take out nightshades. What do you think's more worth it? Looking for the foods that you're sensitive to and just fixating on that, or saying, hey, I probably have to look at the microbiome?
I definitely look at microbiome first. So that's the short answer. And I'll answer a little bit more in depth here too, which is that because I'm a dietitian, people think I focus on food. And the truth of the matter is I really don't. And to say that, I'll preface that with the idea that, of course, you want to eat a generally healthy diet. You know, we want something that is providing a lot of different foods for the microbiome because the foods you eat do feed your microbiome. So it is important to eat an overall healthy diet. So that's not to say go crazy and eat whatever you want. But when you start to think about sensitivities and food triggers in terms of causing either skin issues or digestive issues, my approach is really not to even think about that very much until we've dealt with the microbiome. And then at that point, you know, if there are some sensitivities that truly still remain there, then yeah, we can deal with them at that point. But for most people, first of all, it's incredibly difficult to suss out those triggers when your microbiome is imbalanced because, of course, it's causing all of that localized inflammation. So and I'm sure you hear this too a lot from your clients, and it's something I hear all the time. They're like, I feel like food has something to do with this, but I'll try taking things out. And like one day it feels like it works. And then the other day I'm still having tons of problems, or I'll try something I think I'm sensitive to. And one day I tolerate it fine. And the next day it feels like it makes me feel horrible. And the reason why that happens is because of that inflammation. If it's there and it's causing all sorts of issues, you know, you're going to respond to different foods differently on different days, depending on like what the inflammation scene is doing in your gut. So yeah, I truly don't focus that much on food when it comes to like food sensitivities and triggers causing skin issues or digestive issues.
So funny story. I've had some people who follow these really restrictive diets that are written about. There are some books. They're very popular. I'm not going to mention them here. And they're very restrictive diets. Okay. So they work for some people.
Yeah.
But go and try to reintroduce any of those trigger foods. You can't do it. And the reason why is because the gut was not resolved just by the issues with the gut aren't resolved just by taking the foods out. You still have the gut bacterial issue or parasites or yeast or any number of things going on. You could have a GI dysfunctional issue that needs to be resolved, and the inflammation is still there. So, of course, you feel better by taking out like the needles, you know, that you were sitting on, but the problem is still present.
Exactly. At the end of the day, it's like you're not solving anything with that approach. And because I work so much with digestive health clients, like what they really want, of course, is to be able to tolerate a huge amount of foods and like eat a normal diet and, you know, be able to tolerate things. So that approach really does not work in terms of, I hesitate to say cure, but just a longstanding approach to really dealing with any sort of digestive or skin issue. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. And we're not saying by any way, shape, or form that you can't take a food out and you're not going to see an improvement. I took gluten out when I found out I was gluten sensitive, and my skin rashes at the time went away. However, when I had eczema, that was game over. I could be free of whatever you wanted. My hands were a complete wreck. And that's my clients. They've tried all these different diets free of laundry lists of food, and they still aren't making improvements.
Exactly.
So I think it's important to specify we're not in any way, shape, or form discouraging you, but you should be realistic about what you should expect long-term from that approach, because you might be walking down a road too of ending up with more nutritional deficiencies when your skin is like a sponge. It needs a lot of nutrients. So let's talk about this issue of like the immune system and your skin. So if you get your immune system all riled up, like the gut's unhappy, you've got all this stuff pouring in through these junctions, these cellular junctions that should be sealed, but are not. Does your immune system, or can it play a role in the rashes, it just won't, or rashes or plaques or flaking skin, etc., that just won't go away?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I'm talking about inflammation, in essence, I am also talking about the immune system because that inflammation affects the immune system and vice versa. So they're kind of like one and the same, I guess I would say, because inflammation, of course, is caused by the immune system sort of overreacting to things that are coming through the gut. So when we're talking about inflammation, we are, in essence, talking about the immune system. So, of course, then when you have this sort of low-grade systemic inflammation that happens because of leaky gut, what happens with the immune system is like all over the place. I mean, it's highly associated with autoimmune diseases, things like psoriasis, all that kind of stuff. So you definitely see improvements then when you start to take away that inflammation and you start to sort of calm the immune system down and remove those big particles that are crossing the gut barrier into the bloodstream. Your immune system then is like, okay, I can relax now. There's not such a threat to what's going on in the body that I need to kind of create this huge reaction to. So you then start to see a lot of improvement in skin issues, and that can be anything from, psoriasis to eczema, which are more of those like autoimmune type of skin conditions that we see. But also things like acne can really improve too, even though that's less of sort of an autoimmune thing that happens. We see improvements across the board when you start to lower that inflammation.
And so if we want to talk, because I got to ask you, like if you left and I didn't ask you about probiotics, you're like my queen of probiotics. I got to ask you.
Of course.
So people are going to be like, all right, wait, I should start a probiotic. But you and I know that not all probiotics are created equal. And
Correct.
You could take a probiotic and feel way worse. So
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around that? Like for somebody who's listening to this and they're like, well, I'm trying to get my gut in order. I'm at the beginning of this. I know I should take them. Hey, maybe I'm making this up. I mean, I don't know. I've seen it with clients time and time again.
Yeah.
But what's your take, Kelsey? What do you think about probiotics causing more problems and just being cautious with them?
So I will say I do think that idea is slightly overblown, that like probiotics can be bad. And there recently was this study that I'll refrain on commenting too much about it, but that kind of showed that people with SIBO were getting brain fog from probiotics. And it was just, in my opinion, somewhat of a poorly designed study where they didn't, they were also treating these people for SIBO at the same time. So there's a lot of other things going on that like made it kind of a weird study, and people have kind of taken that study and blown it up to probiotics are bad. So I think there is this change now in how people are thinking about probiotics, which I think is a good thing because, as you said, probiotics are not created equal. There are different strains of probiotics that do very, very different things. And as a whole, we can say, based on the research, probiotics are very helpful. And I want people to remember that piece because they're not bad. They're not necessarily problematic, but you have to sort of choose them for the right thing. And so I have a whole article on this on my website. So I'll lead people there. Hopefully we can connect them with that.
If you send us a link, we'll put it in the show notes, everybody, so you can just go through and check it out because Kelsey's got an amazing site with good content. So we will link to this so you can read more.
Perfect. Yeah, because it's sort of a big topic. But the essence of it is that every probiotic strain, and when I say strain, that means not just like Lactobacillus acidophilus, that's the species. You should see something else after those two names that indicates the strain of bacteria. And most probiotic companies do not tell you the strain. And that's because it's hard to, it's more expensive to get good strains. That way they can also switch their strains at any point as long as it's within the same species. Let's say somebody else gives them a better deal. So it's sort of a sneaky little thing that they do to just make you think that what you're taking is great when in essence it could be something totally different than what you want. So probiotic effects are strain specific. So you have to make sure you're taking a strain that is shown to benefit whatever you're working on. And for skin issues, there's certain ones that help with certain skin conditions and not with others. So you have to be really careful about that. So you have to make sure that you're taking one that makes sense for what you're dealing with. And then if you are someone who has noticed kind of across the board that you're not really tolerating probiotics, usually that is an indication that there is definitely some microbial imbalance in your gut that needs to be dealt with. Because, for example, some people with SIBO don't tolerate probiotics very well. And that's completely normal based on what we know about SIBO. And it means that we kind of need to deal with the SIBO first before we can have somebody on probiotics. So if you don't tolerate them, it's an indication that you should get some testing done and kind of figure out what's going on with your microbiome before you start taking probiotics. But I do think for most people, as long as you're choosing a strain that makes sense for you, even if you haven't had microbiome testing, you can try it out and see how it works for you. And you may have to do a little bit of trial and error based on, how you respond to certain strains. But if you're noticing across the board, all probiotics do not do well for you, then yeah, you really want to dig in a little deeper.
And I also want to add to that the potential side effects that you could feel, in case you don't know this, may be outside of your digestive system. So you could have brain fog, you could feel fatigued, you could feel any number of things. That's the one thing about, when you're stuck in the conventional model of medicine, they're like, just look at where things are. It's localized to that one point. It's your skin, it's your eyes, it's your brain. Like they cut you into gazillion pieces. But Kelsey and I, we both look at the full piece. We want to look at every single symptom that you're experiencing, what's going on as a whole, because they are connected. So it's a different way of approaching your health puzzle. In a sense.
Yeah. And it makes more sense.
It does. It does. I want to touch quickly on some options for a healthy microbiome. And we've talked about probiotics. And then tell us what prebiotics are and the immunoglobulin therapy.
Yeah, I know. That's a tough one to say.
Yes.
But so, essentially what you're talking about is I'll call it my trifecta of things that I tend to use for people who have an imbalanced microbiome. So you're right. We talked about probiotics. Got to make sure you're taking the right kind. But then there's also prebiotics. So prebiotics are carbohydrates, basically, that feed only good bacteria in your gut. So it's a little bit different from things like fiber or just, of course, carbohydrates as a whole, which can feed more than just good bacteria. But the specific definition of prebiotics means they can only feed healthy, beneficial bacteria in the gut. So there's very specific compounds that do that. And they are amazing. And in fact, I tend to kind of think that prebiotics are actually more important than probiotics. And of course, it's a little bit easier to kind of say, well, here's a prebiotic. Most people are going to benefit from this just because it's feeding your good bacteria. Whereas probiotics, as we just discussed, are a little bit more specific, a little bit harder to determine like what makes sense for a specific person. But most people are going to benefit from a prebiotic just because it's going to do so much to balance out your microbiome. Because when you feed good bacteria, really what you're doing is pushing out bad bacteria. So it's sort of, if you've got too much bad, not enough good, and then you increase the good, there's only so many, I like to call them parking spots in the gut. So as those beneficial bacteria are taking up more parking spaces in the parking lot, there's not as many left for the bad bacteria. So it really is this cool balancing effect that is amazing. And then immunoglobulins. So fun name, of course, as we just discussed. And even I mess up, it's like a tongue twister almost. But those are basically antibodies that you can take orally. So there's a couple companies that are making some cool products with this concept in mind. One of them is orthomolecular. They have a product called SBI Protect that is an immunoglobulin supplement. And so you just take those immunoglobulins, which are, like I said, antibodies. So they're sort of helping you kick out bad bacteria. They're also preventing that bad bacteria and those bacterial toxins from wreaking havoc. So they prevent that first of all, localized inflammation from happening within the gut. So they prevent leaky gut from happening in the first place. So they sort of seal that up. So then any LPS or bad things in the gut already, they're not getting into the bloodstream and then causing all these sort of problems systemically. So it's a really cool concept. And I think we'll start to see more and more of this in the gut health world as it becomes more popular. And I'm very excited about that because it's something that just even from a theoretical standpoint, based on the research that we have, has really awesome implications when it comes to helping people heal not only their gut, but of course, then all these other systemic problems that happen when you develop leaky gut.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kelsey. This has been very informative. This is why I go to you. You are my go-to person. Anytime I have a probiotic question, Kelsey is the first person I text. We have long conversations via text about probiotics.
So fun.
But everybody, please go and check Kelsey out. Kelsey, your website, how can they find you?
KelseyKinney.com.
Awesome.
And I'm sure you'll link to it.
Yes, we will link to it. You've got a Facebook page, an Instagram account. We're going to link to all of that in the show notes. And again, we will link to that article that you talked about as well, so everybody can go and check that out. This is an important part of the process. No matter what type of skin condition you have, your gut has to be one of the spots you look at, not just your skin. Thank you, Kelsey, for joining us.
Thank you, Jen. This was really, really fun.
All right, if your mind wasn't blown, then I don't know what was going on, but I really hope that Kelsey has helped to shift your understanding of the distinct relationship between what's going on in your gut as well as what's going on in your skin. And please, just a reminder, guys, I've had plenty of clients who have chronic skin rash issues with eczema, psoriasis, etc., who have no gut symptoms whatsoever. And the gut was absolutely a crucial part to helping get the ship righted, okay? Remember, we've taken all the notes for you, so head on over to the show notes of this episode to grab any links, check Kelsey out, connect with her, and yes, we will continue diving deep in the next episode. So I'll see you over there so we can continue helping you rebuild healthy skin.